I was sitting on my back porch with a cold beer in my hand when I saw her marching across my lawn like she owned the place. Her face already twisted into that expression I had come to recognize all too well over the past 6 months since moving to Pinewood Estates in Chandler, Arizona. My name is Brennan, and I had purchased this 3/4 acre lot specifically because it gave me enough space to live the semi-rural lifestyle I wanted while still being close enough to Phoenix for work. I am a software developer who works remotely most days, and part of my dream had always been to have a small backyard chicken operation. Nothing fancy, just enough birds to provide fresh eggs for myself, and maybe sell a few dozen to neighbors who appreciated knowing where their food came from. The woman stomping toward me was Patricia Henderson, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association. She was in her late 40s, with that haircut that seemed to be standard issue for women who made complaining their full-time hobby. You know the one, shorter in the back and angled sharply toward the front, blonde with aggressive highlights. She wore white capri pants and a floral blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her oversized sunglasses were pushed up on her head like a headband. "Mr. Brennan," she called out before she even reached my porch, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk about those chickens immediately." I took a slow sip of my beer and set it down on the small table next to my chair. "Good afternoon, Patricia. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," her voice went up an octave. "The problem is that you have farm animals in a residential neighborhood. This is completely unacceptable, and I am here on behalf of the HOA to demand that you remove them at once." I had been expecting this conversation ever since I had installed the coop 3 weeks ago. I had done my homework thoroughly before making any moves. "Patricia, I appreciate your concern, but I have checked the zoning laws extensively. My lot is 3/4 of an acre, and according to Chandler City Code, residential properties of my size are permitted to keep up to 12 chickens without requiring any special permits." Her mouth opened and closed like one of my hens going after a bug. "That may be what the city says, but the HOA has rules about this sort of thing. You cannot just decide to turn your property into a farm." "I have 6 chickens, Patricia. 6 hens, no roosters, so there is no noise issue. They are in a well-maintained coop that I built myself, and it is set back 30 feet from my property line, which exceeds the city requirement of 20 feet. She crossed her arms over her chest, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I do not care what the city says. The HOA covenant clearly states that no livestock is permitted on residential properties." This was where I had her, and I could not help the slight smile that crossed my face. Actually, I reviewed the covenant very carefully before I bought this property. The livestock clause you are referring to specifically mentions cattle, horses, pigs, and goats. Chickens are not listed. Additionally, there is a clause that states where the HOA rules conflict with city zoning laws, the less restrictive regulation applies. Patricia's face was starting to turn an interesting shade of red. "That is not how I interpret it." "Well, that is how the law interprets it. I consulted with a real estate attorney before I even bought the property, and then again before I got the chickens. Everything I am doing is completely legal and within both city ordinances and HOA guidelines." "We will see about that," she snapped. "I am calling an emergency HOA board meeting, and we will be voting on an amendment to explicitly ban chickens. And until that is resolved, I expect you to keep those birds quiet and out of sight. They are hens, Patricia. They are quiet by nature, and they are in my backyard on my property. If you are seeing them, it is because you are going out of your way to look." She turned on her heel and stormed off, and I watched her go with a mixture of amusement and irritation. I had moved to Pinewood Estates because the lots were larger, and the area felt less cramped than typical suburban developments. The HOA had seemed reasonable when I reviewed the documents during the buying process. The fees were not outrageous, and most of the rules were common-sense things about keeping your lawn maintained and not painting your house neon pink. But Patricia Henderson had been a problem from day one. She had left a note on my door 2 days after I moved in, complaining that my moving truck had been parked on the street and was creating an eyesore. Never mind that I was actively unloading it, and it was gone within 6 hours. Then she had complained about the height of my grass when I was 3 days past the typical mowing schedule because my mower had broken and I was waiting for a part. Every interaction with her had been combative and exhausting. I went back inside and pulled up the documentation I had compiled before getting the chickens. I had screenshots of the relevant city code sections, a letter from my attorney confirming the legality of my chicken operation, and detailed notes on the HOA covenant and its limitations. I scanned everything and saved it to a cloud folder, then sent copies to my attorney, Michael Preston, with a brief email explaining the encounter. Michael responded within an hour. "Carter, based on what you have described, you are on solid legal ground. However, HOAs can be persistent and sometimes expensive to fight even when you are in the right. Document every interaction with Patricia and the board. Keep records of dates, times, and exact words if possible. If they try to fine you or take legal action, contact me immediately." The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7 in the community clubhouse. I received the notification via email 3 days after Patricia's visit, along with a formal letter delivered to my mailbox. The letter informed me that the board would be discussing concerns regarding unauthorized agricultural activities on my property, and that my attendance was strongly encouraged. I showed up 15 minutes early with a leather folder containing printed copies of all my documentation. The clubhouse was a modest building near the community pool, with a large meeting room that had a conference table at one end and rows of chairs for residents. About 20 people were already there, most of them older retired folks who apparently had nothing better to do on a Thursday evening. Patricia sat at the head of the conference table with 4 other board members, looking like she was about to chair a congressional hearing. The other board members were less familiar to me. There was Donald Myers, a retired accountant in his 60s who served as treasurer. Ramona Liu, who was probably in her 50s and worked as a nurse, was the secretary. The other 2 were Henry Walsh, a portly man who owned a local insurance agency, and Jennifer Martinez, a younger woman maybe in her late 30s who I thought worked in real estate. Patricia banged a gavel on the table with unnecessary force. "This emergency meeting of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association Board is now called to order. We are here tonight to address a serious violation of community standards by one of our residents, Mr. Carter Brennan." I raised my hand. "Point of order. I would like to note for the record that I am not in violation of any community standards, HOA covenants, or city ordinances." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You are keeping farm animals in a residential neighborhood." "I am keeping 6 hens in a properly constructed and maintained coop on my 3/4-acre lot, which is explicitly permitted under Chandler zoning code for residential properties of my size." Donald Myers leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Patricia, before we go further, did we actually verify the zoning regulations? If the city allows it, we need to be careful about how we proceed." "The city may allow it, but we do not have to," Patricia insisted. "That is the whole point of having an HOA." We maintain standards that go beyond basic city requirements. Jennifer Martinez spoke up, her voice more measured than Patricia's. That is true, but we also have to work within the legal framework of our covenant. Carter, you said you have documentation. I stood and walked to the front of the room, distributing packets to each board member. This includes the relevant section of Chandler City Code, which explicitly permits up to 12 chickens on lots of my size without any special permit or license. It also includes excerpts from our HOA covenant showing that chickens are not listed under the Livestock Prohibition Clause, and the section stating that where HOA rules conflict with zoning laws, the less restrictive regulation applies. Finally, I have included a letter from my real estate attorney confirming the legality of my chicken operation. Ramona Liu was flipping through the pages, her brow furrowed. This does seem pretty clear. The covenant does not specifically mention chickens. That is because when it was written, no one imagined someone would try to turn their backyard into a farm, Patricia said, her voice rising. We need to amend the covenant to close this loophole. Henry Walsh scratched his chin. Amending the covenant is not a simple process, Patricia. We would need to notify all residents, hold a vote, and get approval from 2/3 of the homeowners. That could take months. Then we start the process immediately, Patricia declared. In the meantime, I propose we issue a cease and desist order to Mr. Brennan requiring him to remove the chickens pending the outcome of the amendment vote. You cannot do that, I said firmly. I am not in violation of any existing rule. You cannot enforce a rule that does not exist yet. That would be like giving me a speeding ticket before the speed limit is posted. Jennifer Martinez nodded slowly. He has a point. If the current covenant does not prohibit chickens and city zoning allows them, we do not have grounds to force him to remove them right now. Patricia's face was getting that red color again. So we are just supposed to sit back and let him do whatever he wants. What is next, goats, pigs? Those are explicitly prohibited in the covenant, I pointed out. Chickens are not. The meeting devolved into a heated debate among the board members. Patricia was adamant that something had to be done immediately, while the others seemed more cautious about the legal implications. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of circular arguments, they took a vote on Patricia's proposal to issue a cease and desist order. It failed 3-2, with only Patricia and Henry Walsh voting in favor. However, the board did vote unanimously to begin the process of amending the covenant to explicitly prohibit chickens. They scheduled a community-wide meeting for 3 weeks later to present the proposed amendment and gather input before putting it to a vote. I left the meeting feeling like I had won the battle, but was about to face a longer war. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Patricia was campaigning hard against my chickens. She went door to door talking to neighbors, held a coffee meeting at her house to discuss preserving property values, and even posted flyers around the community showing dramatic photos of industrial chicken farms with the caption, "Is this what we want for Pinewood Estates?" I decided to fight back with facts and positive engagement. I created a simple website with information about backyard chickens, including photos of my small, clean coop and my well-cared-for hens. I explained the benefits of having fresh eggs, the minimal maintenance required, and the fact that hens without roosters create virtually no noise. I also shared information about how urban chicken keeping was becoming increasingly popular across the country as people sought more sustainable food sources. Then, I started giving away eggs. I went to each of my immediate neighbors and introduced myself properly, offering them a free dozen eggs. Most of them were friendly and had no issues with my chickens. Several mentioned They had not even realized I had them until Patricia started her campaign. One neighbor, an older man named George who lived 2 houses down, actually thanked me and said he had been considering getting chickens himself before Patricia started causing trouble. She has been like this since she got elected to the board 5 years ago, George told me, standing in his driveway while examining the carton of eggs I had given him. She thinks being HOA president makes her the queen of the neighborhood. She tried to fine me once because my grandson left his skateboard on my front porch, and she said it was unsightly debris. I had to threaten to sue before she backed off. That sounds about right, I said. Did you really threaten to sue? Damn right I did. Got a lawyer to write her a letter and everything. Cost me $300, but she left me alone after that. He grinned. You need any backup at this community meeting, you let me know. I will be there to speak in favor of your chickens. The community meeting arrived on a Wednesday evening. The clubhouse was packed with at least 60 residents, far more than had attended the previous board meeting. Patricia had clearly rallied her supporters, but I had also been working to build my own coalition of reasonable people who did not want the HOA overstepping its authority. Patricia started the meeting with a PowerPoint presentation that would have been laughable if it had not been so frustrating. She had slides showing professional photos of chickens, statistics about salmonella outbreaks traced to backyard eggs, and property value data that she claimed showed homes near agricultural operations sold for less money. None of it was actually relevant to my 6 well-maintained hens, but she presented it with the gravity of someone delivering a TED talk about a national crisis. When she finished, she opened the floor for comments. The first person to stand was a woman in her 30s named Emily who lived across the street from me. I just want to say that I have zero problem with Carter's chickens, she said. I have 2 kids who think they are adorable. We bought eggs from him last week and they were delicious. My children learned more about where food comes from in one afternoon visiting his coop than they have in months of school. A man named Robert stood next. I am more concerned about the precedent of the HOA trying to ban something that is legal and that some residents clearly want. What is next? Are we going to ban vegetable gardens because Patricia thinks tomato plants are ugly? Are we going to require everyone to have the exact same grass and shrubs? Patricia bristled. That is a ridiculous slippery slope argument. We are talking about farm animals. 6 hens, I interjected. Just to keep the facts straight. An older woman named Margaret raised her hand. I have to say, I agree with Patricia. I moved here for a certain quality of life, and that does not include living next to a farm. This is supposed to be a nice neighborhood. It is a nice neighborhood, George called out. Carter's property is immaculate. His coop is cleaner than some people's garages. This is not about quality of life. This is about Patricia wanting to control what other people do on their own property. The meeting went back and forth like this for over an hour. Roughly 2/3 of the speakers supported my right to keep chickens, while the other third sided with Patricia. It became clear that this was about more than just chickens. It was about a fundamental disagreement over what an HOA should be allowed to control. Finally, Patricia called for order and explained the next steps. The board will draft a formal amendment to the covenant prohibiting chickens and other fowl on residential properties. This amendment will be sent to all homeowners, and we will schedule a binding vote in 60 days as required by our bylaws. A 2/3 majority is needed for the amendment to pass. I stood up. I would like to request that the proposed amendment be specific about what it prohibits and why. Vague language about farm animals is not appropriate, and I would like the board to provide actual evidence of harm caused by properly maintained backyard chickens, not just fear-mongering about unrelated issues. Jennifer Martinez nodded. Those are reasonable requests. We will work with our attorney to draft clear language. Over the next 2 months, the chicken issue consumed an absurd amount of time and energy for everyone involved. Patricia continued her campaign with the zealousness of a political candidate running for office. She sent multiple emails to all residents, created a Facebook group called Keep Pinewood Estates Rural Free, and even tried to get local news coverage, though no reporters seemed interested in what they correctly assessed as a petty neighborhood dispute. I focused on maintaining my chickens according to the highest standards and continuing to build relationships with my neighbors. I invited anyone interested to come see my coop and ask questions. About 15 people took me up on the offer over those 2 months, and every single one left saying they had no problem with what I was doing. Several mentioned they were planning to vote against the amendment. The formal amendment, when it was finally distributed, was more reasonable than I had expected. Instead of a blanket ban on all chickens, it proposed limiting them to properties of 1 acre or more, which would effectively ban them on my 3/4-acre lot. The stated reasoning was maintaining residential character and ensuring adequate space for proper animal husbandry. I consulted with my attorney about whether this would hold up if challenged. Michael's assessment was mixed. They are on shakier ground now, because you have established that your operation is well maintained and not causing any actual problems. If they pass this amendment and try to enforce it against you, we could potentially challenge it as arbitrary and capricious, especially since city zoning permits what you are doing. However, fighting it in court would be expensive and time-consuming. Your best bet is to make sure the amendment does not pass in the first place. The 60-day period was nearly up when things took an unexpected turn. I came home from a grocery run on a Saturday afternoon to find my side gate open and my chicken coop door unlatched. 2 of my hens were wandering around the backyard, and I could not immediately find the other 4. My heart started pounding as I quickly secured the 2 hens and then began searching my property. I found another hen under a bush near the back fence. The other 3 were nowhere to be seen. I checked the coop thoroughly and noticed that not only was the door unlatched, but the simple hook and eye closure had been bent, as if someone had forced it open. This was not an accident. Someone had deliberately opened my coop and let my chickens out. I spent the next 2 hours searching the neighborhood, asking neighbors if they had seen any loose chickens. George helped me search and mentioned he had seen Patricia's car driving slowly past my house earlier that afternoon. Eventually, I found 1 more hen in a yard 3 houses down. The other 2 were never recovered. I had to assume they had either been taken or had wandered far enough away that they were now lost for good or picked off by predators. I filed a police report that evening. The responding officer, a young guy named Officer Hernandez, was sympathetic but realistic. Unless you have video evidence or witnesses, there is not much we can do. It is basically vandalism and theft of property, but proving who did it is going to be tough. I have a pretty good idea who did it, I said. Based on what you have told me about this HOA situation, I can guess, he said. But suspicion is not the same as evidence. Do you have any security cameras? Not yet. I am going to install some immediately. Good idea. And keep the police report number. If anything else happens, file another report and reference this one. If we see a pattern, we can investigate more thoroughly. That evening, I ordered a comprehensive security camera system with multiple cameras covering my backyard, front yard, and driveway. It cost me nearly $600 for a quality setup, but I was not taking any more chances. I also installed a keyed padlock on my chicken coop that could not be opened without tools. The installation took most of Sunday, and by evening I had full video coverage of my property with cloud backup of all footage. The cameras had motion detection and night vision, and I could monitor everything from my phone. I did not have to wait long for them to prove their worth. On Tuesday evening, 3 days before the scheduled vote on the chicken amendment, my phone buzzed with a motion alert around 11 in the evening. I was watching television and immediately pulled up the camera feed. There, illuminated by my motion sensor lights, was Patricia Henderson trying to open my side gate. She was dressed in dark clothing and kept looking around nervously. The gate was locked, and after a minute of futile rattling, she moved around to the back of my property where the fence line bordered a common area with desert landscaping. I watched as she tried to climb over my 6-foot fence. She made it about halfway up before apparently realizing she did not have the upper body strength to pull herself over. She dropped back down and stood there for a moment, and I could see her face clearly in the camera's night vision. She looked frustrated and angry. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She pulled out her phone, made a call, and less than 5 minutes later, a teenage boy appeared. They had a brief conversation I could not hear, and then the kid laced his fingers together to give Patricia a boost over the fence. She landed awkwardly in my backyard, stumbled, but caught herself. The kid climbed over after her with much more ease. Together, they approached my chicken coop. Patricia tried the padlock and quickly realized she was not getting through it without bolt cutters. They stood there for a moment discussing something, and then the kid walked over to the coop and began kicking it. I was already calling the police as I ran out my back door. The emergency dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what is your emergency? There are 2 people in my backyard vandalizing my property. I have them on video right now. I need police immediately. I gave my address while walking through my house toward the back door. Sir, please stay inside and do not confront them. Officers are on the way. I understand. I stayed by my back door, watching through the window. Patricia and the kid gave up on the coop and were now looking at my shed, trying to see if they could break into it. The police arrived within 6 minutes. I met them at my front door and quickly explained the situation, showing them the live feed on my phone. 2 officers went around back while 2 others stayed with me. I heard shouting, and then about 3 minutes later, the officers came around from the side of my house with Patricia and the teenage boy in handcuffs. Patricia's face was a mixture of fury and panic. This is absurd. You cannot arrest me on my own property. Madam, this is not your property, one of the officers said calmly. This is Mr. Brennan's property, and you were trespassing and attempting to vandalize his coop. That boy was trying to help me retrieve something I lost over the fence, Patricia insisted. The officer looked at me. Mr. Brennan, do you have video of the incident? I have video of everything from the moment she tried to open my gate to when your officers took them into custody. I also have video from Saturday showing someone opening my coop and releasing my chickens, though the angle is not as clear. The cameras I had ordered had not arrived yet when that happened, but I had quickly set up a temporary camera that at least captured some of what happened. They took statements from everyone. The teenager, who turned out to be Patricia's nephew visiting from California, initially tried to stick to her story but cracked pretty quickly when the officers explained he was being charged with criminal trespass and criminal damage. He admitted Patricia had asked him to help her get into my yard to teach me a lesson about the chickens. Patricia was arrested and charged with criminal trespass, attempted criminal damage, and conspiracy to commit criminal damage. because of the video evidence from Saturday showing someone matching her description releasing my chickens. They also charged her with theft and criminal damage related to that incident. The nephew was charged as an adult since he was 19, facing criminal trespass and criminal damage charges. The whole thing was surreal. I gave the officers a copy of all my video footage, and they left around 1 in the morning. I barely slept that night, running through everything that had happened and trying to process the fact that Patricia had actually tried to vandalize my property and had been arrested. The next morning, word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By noon, I had received calls and texts from at least 15 different residents expressing shock and support. George came by with coffee and breakfast burritos. I knew Patricia was controlling and petty, but I never thought she would do something criminal, he said, shaking his head. This is wild. The scheduled vote on the chicken amendment was thrown into chaos. Jennifer Martinez called me that afternoon to explain that Patricia had been placed on administrative leave from the board pending the outcome of her criminal case. The board had decided to postpone the vote indefinitely while they figured out how to proceed. Honestly, Carter, I do not think the amendment is going to pass even if we do hold a vote, Jennifer said. A lot of people are questioning Patricia's motives now, and there is a general sense that the board overstepped by getting so involved in this issue. I personally think we should just drop it. I appreciate that, I said. For what it is worth, I never wanted this to become such a big deal. I just wanted to keep a few chickens on my property. I know. And for what it is worth, I am sorry the board did not shut this down earlier. Patricia can be very persuasive and very persistent. Over the next few weeks, the legal process ground forward. Patricia hired a lawyer and initially tried to fight the charges, but the video evidence was overwhelming. Her attorney eventually negotiated a plea deal where she pled guilty to misdemeanor trespass and criminal damage charges in exchange for the theft charges being dropped. She received 2 years probation, had to pay restitution for my 2 lost chickens and the damage to my original coop latch, and was required to complete anger management classes. The nephew took a similar plea deal. Both of them were also required to stay away from my property as a condition of their probation. Patricia resigned from the HOA board in disgrace. A special election was held, and a mild-mannered retired teacher named Dorothy was elected as the new president. One of her first acts was to formally withdraw the proposed amendment banning chickens. At the next regular board meeting, which I attended out of curiosity, Dorothy made a brief statement. The board has reviewed the chicken issue extensively, and we have concluded that properly maintained backyard chickens on appropriately sized lots are not a problem for the community. Mr. Brennan has been a responsible chicken owner, and his operation is fully compliant with both city zoning and our HOA covenant. We consider this matter closed. There was applause from the dozen or so residents in attendance, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. I used the restitution money from Patricia to buy 2 new hens, bringing my flock back up to 6. I named them Liberty and Justice, which seemed appropriate given everything they had been through. My security camera system stayed up and running, and I never had another incident. In the months that followed, 3 other residents in Pinewood Estates got chickens of their own. George was one of them, building a lovely coop that was even nicer than mine. Emily, the neighbor across the street who had spoken up for me at the community meeting, got 4 hens and started selling eggs at the local farmers market. The community became known in Chandler as a neighborhood friendly to urban farming, and property values actually increased slightly according to local real estate listings. I ran into Patricia once at the grocery store about 6 months after her arrest. She saw me, turned bright red, and immediately went down a different aisle without making eye contact. I felt a brief moment of pity for her. She had let her need for control consume her to the point of committing crimes and destroying her own reputation. But mostly, I just felt grateful that it was over. My attorney Michael and I had lunch one day to celebrate the resolution of everything. "You know what the ironic thing is," he said. "If Patricia had just left you alone from the beginning, you probably would have gotten bored with the chickens after a year or two and might have gotten rid of them on your own. By making it into such a battle, she guaranteed you would keep them forever out of principle." He was absolutely right. What had started as a simple desire to have fresh eggs and enjoy a bit of homesteading had become a symbol of property rights and freedom from overreaching HOAs. Those chickens were staying until they died of old age, and I would probably replace them when that happened. I also became a bit of an advocate in the local community for reasonable HOA governance. I attended city council meetings when HOA-related issues came up, and shared my story as an example of what can go wrong when HOAs are given too much power without adequate checks and balances. I joined a local organization working to reform HOA laws in Arizona to give homeowners more protection against arbitrary enforcement and unreasonable restrictions. One of the most satisfying moments came about a year after the whole ordeal ended. I was in my backyard checking on the chickens one morning when Emily called to me from her yard across the street. She walked over with her 2 kids, who were maybe 7 and 9 years old. "Carter, the kids wanted to ask if they could help collect eggs today," she said. "Of course." I opened the coop and showed them how to gently reach under the hens and collect the eggs. They were delighted, handling each egg like it was made of glass and carefully placing them in the basket. The younger one, a girl named Sophie, looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for fighting to keep your chickens. Mommy said some people did not want you to have them, but you did not give up." "That is right," I said. "Sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe is right, even when it is hard." "I am glad you did," she said seriously. "Because your chickens are the best." I glanced over at Emily, who had tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she mouthed. That moment crystallized why the whole fight had been worth it. It was not really about chickens. It was about the principle that people should be able to make reasonable choices about how they use their property, without being harassed or controlled by overzealous neighbors or HOA boards. It was about standing up against arbitrary authority and proving that the little guy could win if they were willing to do the work and stand their ground. The chickens themselves remained blissfully unaware of the drama they had caused. They continued to wake up each morning, scratch around in their run, lay their eggs, and go about their chicken business with the same peaceful indifference they had always shown. Watching them was therapeutic, a reminder that sometimes the simplest pleasures in life are worth fighting for. I upgraded their coop that summer, building a larger run with more space for them to roam, and adding some nice perches and nesting boxes. I planted herbs and vegetables around the perimeter that they enjoyed nibbling on when I let them free range in the evenings. The whole setup became a point of pride, something I showed off when friends visited. My relationship with the HOA board under Dorothy's leadership was night and day compared to Patricia's reign. Dorothy actually stopped by one day to introduce herself properly and to apologize on behalf of the board for how things had been handled. "We should have pushed back on Patricia much earlier," she said. But she had been on the board longer than any of us, and she had a way of steamrolling objections. "I am sorry you had to go through all that." "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "And I appreciate how you have been running things since taking over. It feels like an actual homeowners association now, not a dictatorship," She laughed. That is exactly what I am going for. An HOA should handle basic maintenance of common areas and enforce rules that genuinely protect property values and safety. It should not be about one person's personal preferences or vendettas. We talked for a while about her vision for the community, and I found myself genuinely liking her approach. She was practical, fair-minded, and actually listened to residents instead of dictating to them. Under her leadership, the HOA focused on things that actually mattered, like maintaining the community pool, organizing neighborhood watch meetings, and negotiating better rates for landscaping services in the common areas. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons that I carried forward. First, do your homework before you buy property. I had been thorough in checking the zoning laws and HOA documents, and that preparation saved me when Patricia came after me. Second, document everything. The video evidence of Patricia's attempted vandalism was what ultimately protected me and led to her facing consequences for her actions. Third, build relationships with your neighbors. The support I received from George, Emily, and others in the community was crucial in fighting back against Patricia's campaign. But perhaps the most important lesson was about picking your battles and knowing when to stand your ground. Some people might say it would have been easier to just get rid of the chickens and avoid the confrontation, and maybe in some short-term sense that would have been true. But I knew I was in the right, both legally and ethically. Giving in to Patricia's unreasonable demands would have set a precedent that she could bully anyone in the neighborhood into doing whatever she wanted. By standing firm, I not only protected my own rights, but also helped create a better community for everyone. Patricia's removal from the board and the shift in HOA leadership benefited every resident in Pinewood Estates. The neighborhood became a more pleasant place to live, with less petty enforcement and more focus on genuine community building. I also gained an unexpected appreciation for how local government and law interact with HOAs. The fact that city zoning laws took precedence over HOA restrictions in cases of conflict was crucial to my case. It made me more aware of how important it is to stay informed about local regulations and to participate in local government when possible. About 18 months after the whole ordeal began, I was invited to speak at a city council meeting about proposed updates to Chandler's urban farming ordinances. I told my story and advocated for clear language that would protect residents who wanted to engage in small-scale chicken keeping and gardening. The council was receptive, and several of my suggestions were incorporated into the final ordinance that was passed a few months later. That ordinance became a model for other Arizona cities dealing with similar issues. I received emails from people in Phoenix, Tempe, and Scottsdale thanking me for helping to pave the way for clearer regulations around backyard chickens. It was gratifying to know that my personal battle had contributed to positive change for others. The chickens themselves continued to be a source of joy and fresh eggs. I settled into a comfortable routine with them, spending about 30 minutes each morning and evening on their care. I learned which hens had which personalities. One of them, a Rhode Island red I had named Henrietta, was bold and curious, always the first to investigate anything new in the coop. Another, a buff Orpington named Goldie, was shy and preferred to stay in the background but gave me the most eggs. I started a small Instagram account documenting life with the chickens, partly because I enjoyed sharing their antics and partly as a way to educate people about responsible chicken keeping. The account grew slowly but steadily, reaching a few thousand followers over time. Most of them were people in similar situations, dealing with HOA restrictions or city regulations, and looking for information and support. One of my posts about the Patricia situation went viral, getting shared across multiple platforms and generating hundreds of comments from people who had their own HOA horror stories. It was eye-opening to see how common these conflicts were and how many people felt powerless against their HOAs. I tried to respond to as many comments as I could, offering advice based on my experience and encouraging people to know their rights and document everything. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. I continued working remotely, the chickens provided fresh eggs, and my relationships with neighbors were strong. George and I became good friends, often having beers on one of our porches in the evenings while the chickens free-ranged nearby. His grandkids loved visiting both our properties to interact with the chickens, and watching their delight never got old. Emily's egg business at the farmer's market took off, and she expanded to 8 chickens, which was the maximum allowed on her lot size. She credited me with inspiring her to pursue something she had always wanted to do, but had been afraid to try. Her kids grew more confident and knowledgeable about animal care, taking responsibility for daily chicken chores and learning valuable lessons about where food comes from. Even people who had initially been skeptical or opposed to the chickens came around over time. Margaret, the woman who had spoken against me at the community meeting, eventually approached me at a neighborhood barbecue and admitted she had been wrong. I let Patricia get in my head with all her talk about property values and rural atmospheres, she said. But honestly, your place looks great, and I have not noticed any negative impact at all. I am sorry I did not support you from the beginning. I appreciate you saying that, I told her. And there are no hard feelings. People have different comfort levels with things, and that is okay. We ended up having a long conversation about her concerns, and I gave her a tour of my coop and setup. She left with a dozen eggs and a much better understanding of what responsible chicken keeping actually looked like. As for Patricia, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved away about 2 years after her arrest. Apparently the combination of legal troubles, forced resignation from the HOA board, and general embarrassment in the community became too much for her. She sold her house and relocated somewhere in Nevada. I never saw or heard from her again. Her departure felt like the final chapter closing on that difficult period. The new family that moved into her house was lovely, a couple in their 30s with a toddler. They introduced themselves within days of moving in and expressed delight when they learned about the chickens. The wife mentioned she had grown up on a small farm and loved having backyard chickens around. 5 years after I first got my chickens, Pinewood Estates had transformed into one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Chandler specifically, because of its relaxed attitude toward urban farming and sustainable living. Real estate agents marketed homes in the area as urban farming friendly, and we regularly had younger families moving in who wanted that lifestyle. The HOA, under Dorothy's continued leadership, had become a model of reasonable governance. They maintained the necessary standards for property upkeep and safety, while respecting individual property rights and choices. The neighborhood had a true sense of community, with regular potlucks, an active neighborhood watch, and a shared Facebook group where people helped each other out with everything from tool lending to pet sitting. I often reflected on how different things might have been if Patricia had approached the situation differently. If she had come to me with genuine questions or concerns instead of demands, we might have found common ground. I might have invited her to see the coop and understand how clean and well-maintained it was. We might have discussed reasonable boundaries or conditions that would address any legitimate concerns. Instead, she chose confrontation and control, and it destroyed her position in the community and resulted in criminal charges. The experience made me a better neighbor and community member. I became more proactive about communication, making sure that anything I did on my property that might affect others was discussed openly. When I decided to install solar panels, I mentioned it to nearby neighbors first, even though I did not need anyone's permission. When I wanted to plant a row of trees along my back property line, I talked to the neighbor whose view might be affected to make sure they were comfortable with my choice of species and placement. These small acts of consideration and communication went a long way toward maintaining good relationships. People appreciated being informed and having their perspectives considered, even when the ultimate decision was mine to make. It created a culture of mutual respect that benefited everyone. My chickens became minor celebrities in the neighborhood. Kids asked to visit them. Adults stopped by to chat while I was doing chicken chores, and they featured in countless school projects and presentations. I gave several presentations at local elementary schools about urban farming and responsible animal care, always bringing pictures and sometimes even eggs to show the students. The simple decision to get 6 chickens for fresh eggs had spiraled into something much larger, a symbol of individual rights, reasonable governance, and community building. It had tested me in ways I never expected, forcing me to learn about legal issues, stand up to unreasonable authority, and advocate not just for myself, but for principles I believed in. Looking back, would I do it all again knowing the trouble it would cause? Absolutely. The chickens brought joy to my life and to the lives of neighbors and their children. They taught valuable lessons about standing up for what is right and not backing down in the face of bullying or unreasonable authority. They improved my community by helping to remove a problematic HOA president and by inspiring positive changes in local governance. Every morning when I collected fresh eggs from the coop, I was reminded that the best things in life often require fighting for them. Those eggs represented more than breakfast. They represented freedom, principle, community, and the satisfaction of knowing I had done the right thing even when it was hard. The chickens kept laying eggs, the sun kept rising over Chandler, Arizona, and life in Pinewood Estates continued peacefully. My lot, 3/4 of an acre of carefully maintained property with 6 happy hens scratching around in their coop, stood as a testament to what happens when someone is willing to stand their ground for reasonable freedoms against unreasonable restrictions. And that, in the end, was worth every moment of struggle, every hour spent researching regulations, every tense board meeting, and every dollar spent on legal consultations. It was worth it because it was right, because it mattered, and because those 6 chickens and the principle they represented made my corner of the world a better place.